context on this panel.
Okay, go.
So just a little bit of context on this panel. We were talking one day, George and I, about, you know, how do you define learning analytics? How is it different from some other conferences and so forth? And what we ended up doing is kind of just asking about 15 folks who had the most number of publications at the Learning Analytics Conference, a few questions about, you know, how do you define LAK? How does it relate to these other conferences and so forth? And we wrote a LAK paper on their answers. And that paper was then rejected, rightfully so, because we only included, you know, a subset of people who sort of were the most successful at LAK. And so I think that was a really fair critique and sort of ended up in this interactive panel. And the goal of this panel is to sort of get the conversation started, include more voices from a range of different career stages, and really trying to start the conversation and hopefully to move forward with a more like inclusive conversation to sort of maybe help shape how LAK is defined and how people can participate. So with that, I just want to say that we have 4 lovely panelists who have, and George and I will moderate. So we have Roberto, Kirsty, Shamya, and Vita, who will be answering our questions today. But hopefully this can be a relatively interactive panel where we'll ask the panelists some questions, have them respond with very brief responses. So I know we've talked about this over email, so try to limit your responses because we really want to get the audience involved and have questions. So we have a few questions planned, so we'll go through those and then hopefully have time at the end for the audience to jump in and probe panelists further. So with that being said, I think what we'll do is have each panelist start by answering the questions in turn, and then open up at each question for a few additional questions and leave time at the end for general discussion. So the first question, I'm actually going to kind of merge 2 of them together in the interest of time. And maybe Roberto, you're first on screen, so maybe I'll pass it to you first, and then Kirsty, Shamya, and Vita can follow. So can you tell us, how do you define learning analytics, and how do you think learning analytics relates to some other conferences that share some overlapping things, say artificial intelligence in education, educational data mining, and so forth?
Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so I'm going to be a bit provocative. So for me, learning analytics is a subfield of HCI, human-computer interaction, because we pretty much feel most of the definition of HCI. HCI research seeks to foster a deep understanding of cognitive and social behavior of users of computing systems and the organizational and social impacts of that usage. Obviously, we are focusing on education, on improving learning, or sometimes on improving teaching. So there is a difference. Another characteristic in our case is that we strongly ground on theory, but still that happens in HCI. There's nothing extremely novel. Besides, we're talking about educational theory. And similarly to HCI as well, design is one of the learn analytics pillars, which also is a pillar in human-computer interaction. And in our case, we go beyond just simply designing interfaces, but also the learning design, designing the whole experience, designing pedagogical experiences around the technology. So yeah, that this can be argued definitely. And there are ties as well, we are more specific, and probably that's why it's a community in itself, and it doesn't have that many ties with HCI, or there are some, but not that explicit. Is because there's a stronger tie with the learning sciences field. We want to ground our analytics on educational theory, so learning sciences is a perfect marriage. And obviously we have ties with AIED and EDM, overlaps, and also our particular characteristics. But what makes learning analytics, I believe, closer to HCI is that we want to close the loop. There is some kind of interface between the models and the end users. So there's lots we can learn from HCI.
So Roberto, Roberto, do you mind if I just quickly jump in and tease that out a little bit? So one of the difficulties I think always in field definitions, on the one hand, it's a little bit of an activity that doesn't always produce sort of a clear outcome, but it's an important part of trying to get the language right and get on the same page. But I'm wondering if you could, if it's basically HCI, then should learning analytics exist as a field? Or what is the demarcation that you would then say, oh, it's like HCI, but to Caitlin's question on what are learning analytics, where would you draw a distinction, or don't you see one at all?
Yeah, I was highlighting also the distinctions. I still feel it's a subfield of HCI. It doesn't mean that there is no need for its own community, because we have our own identity, is strongly grounded on educational theory. That's something that in HCI is not needed. Not everything needs to be grounded on any theory, and sometimes these theories are very general. So that's a strong distinction, and I think more than enough to have its own identity as its own community. But we are still talking about human factors all the time. And maybe the next question, which is about the scope, what is a paper that is not part of learning analytics? And I've seen several reviews when we have just a model, but there is no even a hint about how we're going to feed this back to final users. Then we start to say, what is the learning analytics? Where it's closing the loop? What, all these questions are about human factors. And I'm talking about HCI as a very, very broad area. There are so many sub-communities within HCI as well. And LAK seems to be one of them.
Well, and one final question before we pass it on. I just, because this is a, because it matters where you put the pegs in the ground, right? And so if it seems like, as you're articulating learning analytics, a learning analytics paper and an HCI paper, it sounds like, if I've interpreted what you're saying correctly, the main distinction is the community from which the paper emerges. You're not assigning a content or a thematic or a methodological assignment to the paper. You're assigning the community origin. Correct? Not correct? I just want to make sure I get it, because we're going to have different opinions and I don't want to spend too much time. And I'm not trying to interrogate you. It's a good provocative start.
I mean, when we write a paper for LAK, we're more comfortable to write in educational terms. And if it's when writing for HCI, we need to go a little bit beyond that. So yeah, definitely. But that happens when we are, yeah, I mean, it's kind of normal because that's a wider audience. But yeah, I don't see a big difference. That's the only thing. And EdTech, yeah, there was a question from Alisa, then EdTech, HCI. Yeah, because we're talking about technology and humans. It's just that we are talking about education, and there are particularities in education, of course. It's not the same to create an educational technology that a mouse, and both can have to do with human-computer interaction. So, and HCI is like that. There are different fields, and there are different theories, and other fields that has communication with, like with ergonomics is another field, but HCI has interdependence with that. So yeah, I mean, it's not a strong stance, but it is like, we're talking about technology and people, and when we publish something, there are similarities.
All right, that's a good way to start us off. I'm going to pass it over to Kirsty to, given her disagreement with this, to elaborate on your opinion about learning analytics and how it relates to these other fields.
Well, I mean, just because this is a panel and boring panels where everyone everyone agrees with each other, basically the bane of my life. I don't think LA is a subfield of HCI. I think HCI is a contributing field, and it's an important part of like learning analytics, but it's not the containing kind of bucket. And I think it would be a very big mistake to give precedence to a particular sort of earlier field. So other fields like cognitive science and computer science and, you know, like modeling are also very, very important to learning analytics. And if we're going to give priority to one particular sort of subfield or contributing field, then that pushes the field in a direction where it's potentially taking on the characteristics of that field in a way that I don't consider particularly helpful to, you know, creating a new field that is at the intersection of a lot of different fields. So, you know, even today, you know, we've seen like Jedi and how Jedi can come and inform like learning analytics. Those conversations get blocked off if learning analytics is contained by, I would claim. But, you know, we could be arguing about this all day, Roberto, so that's fine. So one thing I would like to emphasize is I really hate the definition of learning analytics as, you know, optimizing learning and the environments in which it occurs and all of that stuff. I find that really problematic. I think that is, again, like far too computational. So that's giving too much precedence to another kind of contributing field of learning analytics, which would be sort of web analytics and computational approaches. And I think we have to work very hard as a field to make sure that all contributing fields are given sort of a fairly equal seat at the table and can kind of help to shape the field. So my preference will always be towards not taking anything as the grounding field that we come from, because basically that kind of thinking comes from, well, we know Roberto's come from HCI, so of course he's going to give precedence to HCI, whereas, you know, other people have come from maybe machine learning, so they're going to give precedence to machine learning. And what's going to happen is they're going to review our papers from very different perspectives without thinking about the other fields and without taking account of the other contributing fields. And we need to make sure that we're thinking from these different lenses, even if they're not our grounding fields. So that's probably enough from me, Caitlin.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll pass it to Shamya now. So it sounds like right now we're kind of focusing on the definition of LA, maybe a little more. We can circle back to some of the distinctions between LA and other conferences or fields.
All right. I guess I'm at the again, I'm probably representing early career scholars in the field, and I'm wondering, like, who am I here to define learning analytics for everyone, especially for teachers who are going to be using learning analytics in their classrooms, and what kind of power do I hold right now to be defining learning analytics for everyone? But putting that aside, a couple of things that I liked in maybe what Roberto said is one thing, having come predominantly from a computer science background, what I really liked about LAK LA is the human-centered aspect. And if that is something that we are going to get from HCI, I'm happy to take that from HCI. If, as Kirsty was saying, if we can borrow and contribute to fields like theories from learning sciences and how that drives our work, or analytics, certain analytic methods from EDM, and probably certain systems, or adding human-centeredness to those systems from AI Ed, I would be happy to borrow and contribute back to all of these fields and not have learning analytics be defined as driven by a particular field. Well, one thing I think is important for me when defining learning analytics is probably keeping all stakeholders in mind, learning analytics for whose interests are served. So defining learning analytics as something that's serving not just the dominant group, but everybody that we intend to serve, including those who are in the periphery of this discussion, probably not represented in this conversation.
Thanks, Shamya. Vita, what do you have for us?
So I would also disagree with Roberto. Let's say that. What's a couple of things, but also with Kirsty about the definition. First of all, I think definition is pretty good in my opinion. I didn't like it so much at the start, but think about it. It's hold for 10 years, right? It's been there for 10 years and it's still being used. And personally, I think the optimization part, that's the most contentious part there. But how do you define, like, isn't the whole point of education to improve the learning? So change optimizing into improving, understanding and improving learning, if you understand optimizing in that sense, not in computational sense, it's pretty much the definition of education. Like there's not much different. Like we collect data, do the analysis to understand and improve. What's wrong with that? So in terms of subsetting of HCI or any other field, I agree with Kirsty there. That's just one of the factors. The other is education, clearly, and cognitive science, and linguistics, and sociology, and psychology, and whatnot. A bunch of fields coming there. The difference why I wouldn't put it in HCI or neither of these, and probably I would put it as a subset of education primarily, is what kind of findings you care mostly about. Like if you find a finding that students way they regulate learning in one course is affecting the way they're going to regulate in the future one, who cares about that in HCI? Like in HCI, that's not the kind of findings they care. And I don't think also computer scientists would care most. So probably the people who would care would be probably educational psychologists and educational researchers. They would care about this kind of. Did you find it through educational technology or through working on sheets of paper? They wouldn't care about that bit, but they would care about your findings. I think if you take a look at most of LAK papers and look at what is actually that they found, people who would be mostly interested in those things would be educational and educational psychology researchers. In terms of difference, I think the difference with other fields, the other venues, sorry, is primarily the focus, right? I remember Mikola Pecinetsky won on a similar panel mentioning the difference between with educational data mining, in the sense that educational data mining deals with more complicated algorithms, but a more specific domain. And I really agree with that. It's more complicated computationally, but on a sudden, like you're looking at an educational game or a tutoring system or something, and then you do the smaller data set and grind it to that with a very complicated, very, very sophisticated models. And I think that would be, for example, the difference with EDM or maybe with learning at scale. The idea is of very clearly the focus is at scale, obviously. AID, again, has its own push for a different kind of methods. So I think that's where the focus, they are very similar. I think in a sense, the findings at the end of the day would still be mostly interested in educational research.
Okay, thanks, Vita. I mean, so I guess I'll kind of building off of that point. I guess one question I have is, do you think the definitions that you're putting forward then actually separate it from these other venues? So like, because you're saying in some ways it might be methods or scale and things like that. So you can imagine, you know, some of, I guess, whatever definition you sort of hang your hat on, does that actually separate it from these other venues? Or would you just say, actually, they're sort of all part of some sort of family and that it just might be based on the conference deadline and what you have available at that moment to submit? I mean, I'm kind of being, I guess, cheeky here, but I'm curious what you think. Like, how would the definition set you apart of those venues? I guess we'll kind of open it up to any of the panelists who want to jump in on that question.
I think there's flavors. Like, so there's definitely papers I would not submit to EDM versus, you know, LAK versus AI Ed. Like, so, you know, you would, if you had, like Vita is saying, a fairly large data set, you had some nice algorithms, you'd probably send it to EDM. If you had, you know, something that was a bit more cognitively focused, potentially, I'd be thinking about sending it to AI Ed. You know, and there is definitely a strong HCI emphasis to LAK. So if you're returning data back to learners or educators and things like that, closing the loop, then, you know, you'd be thinking it's more likely to be accepted in LAK. So, you know, there is definitely, though, a bit of a deadline kind of effect in terms of what gets sent where. Like, so, you know, and I think the distinctions between the fields are a bit blurry anyway, you know, so I see EDM becoming a bit more sort of human-centered itself these days. So, you know, it's kind of, I think it's unnecessary to kind of insist on distinctions between the different fields for the sake of it. But I think there are flavors, and I do definitely encourage grad students to submit the right type of paper to the right kind of conference because they're more likely to get accepted there.
Is it okay if I sort of push this conversation from papers to project and think about from a project as the unit of analysis? Like if I were to be doing like learning, what I would call as a learning analytics project, I can see how at the at the end of, one of the projects that I'm working on right now is co-designing how to support collaborative reflections with K-12 teachers, with math teachers. I can see how I could possibly writing a learning sciences paper, providing insights on teacher reflection theories, contributing to Miriam Shireen or Shirish Clark's work in learning sciences. I can think about how I could be writing an EDM paper talking about a new multimodal analytics approach or a potential way in which my learning analytics project led to a methodological contribution that way. Or maybe looking at human-centeredness and writing a paper that maybe pushes AI to think about human factors considering in the design of their systems. So I don't know if you're talking about LAK and the kinds of paper that LAK would get. I think that I see where the conversation is going, but in terms of a project itself, and if I'm defining my project as a learning analytics project, I can see how I could be borrowing from and contributing to all of these disciplines. I know probably we are trying to find how we are distinct from these other venues, and I don't know my response helps there, but I don't know why it's important. I'm sorry, maybe it's coming from ignorance.
Anybody else want to chime in on that note? I think that's a good question, which I think George raised earlier in the chat about, is there any value in sort of defining these subfields? So, I mean, perhaps one take is that we don't need to, and that all these, we don't need to carve out sort of distinct differences between the multiple venues. So, but I don't know, any thoughts on that?
I think in general what Kirsty is saying is there is a big overlap, right? There is an overlap, and some of the things, the focus is like, yeah, probably cognitive science being more important for AIAD coming the background, or HCI being in LAK, or maybe machine learning in learning at scale, or EDM, and so on. So they are definitely. What's the value of that? I don't personally. Just being aware of that, and when you're, for example, doing any project or paper or whatever, yeah, you should know about that. To me, they're pretty much just different angles to the same problem. Like, if you look at the definition of learning analytics, could apply to all the other fields. Personally, all of these kind of lose the focus. So probably if you use this to be a definition of AI ad, it would be okay, but it will miss the focus. It will miss their focus. If you put it to a definition of EDM, it will still be okay, but it would be missing their focus, and that's the only difference, right? But overall, generally applies. I think they are. I mean, obviously, they are all related. And if you look at the community, they are overlapping a lot. And if you look at citation analysis and so on, you're going to see that as well. So.
I wonder if I could drop in a little bit on a question, because this is to get a context of the background. So the reason that Caitlin initiated this discussion was how often someone submits a paper, and then the program chairs of that particular conference will reply with some response like, "Oh, this this paper is out of scope for LAK." And so that the question then becomes, what is in scope of LAK? And so we spent a little bit of time looking at the related fields and the way we come, where it comes from. And there's been a discussion going on in periphery around what's the definition, as well. So I'd love to sort of hear a little bit about how or what we would tell someone who has a paper, like what are the attributes of a paper that would fit into these various categories? Like, what is your if-then statement between if this, then LAK, if this, then AI Ed, if this, then EDM? Or is it ultimately just more a function of the social networks that you're connected to?
Yeah, and to follow up on that, one of the questions that I think that we sent you all as well was like, well, what is also out of scope then? So that could be a helpful delineation too. And I think Simon had an interesting question in the chat, which is if some of this is true, then could the same paper be actually submitted to multiple places? Vita seemed to comment that no, because you might be missing a focus, which might be driving this like out of scope sort of commentary. But so what would be in scope and out of scope? And if George's if then statement is an appropriate way to describe it, that would be great.
Yeah, very, very good question. And also tapping on Shamya's idea of also thinking in terms of projects, but also in terms of papers, wearing a reviewer hat as well. I would say that it's clear when some authors do not engage with the values of the community, with foundational papers that actually guide how we approach our research. So, for example, one of the very influential papers for me is, I think, Vita, you are a co-author, the piece in the puzzle of learn analytics, with this diagram of design theory and the methods, the AI or analytics, I think it was the third circle. And those are the three things that I believe we should be endorsing and taking care of when we have a project or a paper, when we just don't focus on the analytics, the technical computational part and education, but also the designery parts. If there is a dashboard, if there is another system, warning system or whatever, okay, how that's going to be embedded with the learning design, because we're talking about design and so on and so forth. So in a paper, if I see that they don't engage with that kind of literature, basic foundational stuff, no learn analytics papers being cited, because maybe there is no awareness of that, even though it's not enough reason for rejecting, but you start to feel if the project is actually going somewhere else where there is no closing the loop, then, or maybe this paper is not within the scope because they don't even understand what are the values of the community.
I agree with Roberto there. That's even technically most of the research, if you just look at the project level, you could frame it to fit most of the fields. This is where the paper is out of scope. If the paper doesn't relate to learning literature, I don't care about the project could be maybe framed to fit, but if your specific paper don't, yes, then it is out of scope. Or if you don't try, so I don't think we should have every paper to have closing the loop and to engage with the design and all of these pieces, but it needs to be taken into the account, like how you can take this research. So I don't know, let's say that something that might be out of scope, tutoring system. You developed a new algorithm for a tutoring system, like a very specific thing, something that it could be framed as a learning analytics research if you want. If you frame it in a sense, well, we can use this tutor to do this and how it's going to fit the rest of the system that Simon's mentioning and all that. That could then be, we had ITS papers at LAK. It could fit. But it also, if it's very narrowed down, doesn't connect to the values, doesn't connect with the literature, yeah, and then it is out of the scope. So it also very much depends on how do you frame it. More than, like I think paper that's submitted to EDM could be submitted to LAK or vice versa. If you, not exactly the same copy, but if you slightly reframe, the project could fit in both.
Yeah, I'd echo, I agree that you need to be aware of the literature of the field. Like, and that's one of my real, like, if I'm reviewing a paper and they're just not even referencing any kind of LAK papers, or, you know, they have no idea of what's gone on in the field before, and they've obviously just rebadged something that got rejected somewhere else. That's a very strong reason normally for me to reject, unless it's doing some very interesting stuff, because it's like you're just not defining the gap and then moving on for that field. But I would say not everything can go everywhere. So, you know, an example I'd pull up would be, you know, a paper with n equals 1. So, you know, let's say you do a really small data kind of study that's following a really small cohort of students with a really rich data set, like a qualitative data set. I would like to think that that kind of paper could get published in LAK, but I know that they quite often don't, right? There's no way a paper like that would get published in EDM. Like, so, you know, and there's no way it would get published in learning scale. Maybe AI Ed, but, you know, like, so, you know, there are some clear places where, you know, I would like to see us distinguishing ourselves a little bit around, you know, what kind of data do we allow? And it's not just big data. And I would like to see us not rejecting papers on the grounds of you only have, like, you know, 5 data points. If there was a really interesting study that does help us actually understand learning and the context in which it's occurring and doing something interesting with that. So what we define as relevant data, I think, is almost one of the clear distinguishing points for some of these fields.
Caitlin, I quickly also want to follow up what Chrissy said. Actually, it connects back to the values we have in the LAK community. So I want to think about it also in terms of what kinds of paper would be out of scope in other places that we can provide a place, which is still really important for us to define learning analytics and what's important for learning. In that sense, an example that comes to mind is following up on what Kirsty was saying, a conversation about redefining rigor for qualitative work. I do not see how that could be, a focus in it could. Maybe I don't know. But LAK seems like a natural place where people can these kinds of conversations, which is probably not the dominant way of thinking about learning analytics, can find a place and can find the voice to finding new ways of doing analytics, which analytics with n equals 1. Why not? And providing a place to have those kinds of conversations.
I think that these answers are dovetailing nicely into one of the other questions that you all were asked to think about, which is, if we're talking about in scope and out of scope, and LAK has clearly grown a lot in the last decade. There's more and more attendees, more and more papers being submitted. So, doing a good job of bringing people in, but there's still a lack of diversity in many ways, in terms of not only just who's attending, but also what type of research is being, I guess lifted up in some ways. Like Kirsty, we're talking about the more qualitative or small data point type submissions. So I'm curious, I don't know who wants to go first, but to think a little bit more about, how can we make the LAK conference more representative in terms of geographical regions, academic disciplines, as well as race and ethnicity? Let's go back to Roberto first.
Yeah, I'm coming also from a university before coming to Australia, where there is a gap, right, in access to resources. So, and we're still collaborating with people in my country and other countries, and it's as simple as not having access to even the library resources. So how can we be diverse, and how can we embrace collaboration more broadly? We can see also the stats of papers accepted, and they come from the typical regions, most of them, the majority. So it's really hard to bridge this gap, and it's something that doesn't depend only on the community. There are geopolitical factors for that, and even just having access to the papers is awesome. That in LAK they are open access. That's fantastic. I mean, this is something that the community needs to be proud of, because that doesn't happen commonly anywhere else. So that makes the research more open, and that's already an extremely helpful action. So that's awesome. I think that's already doing much more than anything we can do. But another potential strategy could be to have a program. I don't know if it has been successful. I learned in another couple of communities supported by ACM, which is pairing researchers from countries where probably there is no access to certain things, resources or expertise or whatever, and pair it with researchers who want to help, and maybe they have access to some of those resources or expertise, and simply help them like a shepherding or as mentoring program. And probably that's one of the ideas that I have regarding how to break those geographical and geographical barriers and socio-economic barriers, especially.
To add to that, is a great point. And one thing that's challenging as well, I mean, you need to take that into account, is that presenting at LAK involves huge costs. I mean, or any other conference. So if you're a scholar from developing world or non-EU US institutions, it's pretty hard to attend. So that's something that whatever you do, it's going to be the problem. Like your open access and all of those things are fine, but at the end of the day, if you want to submit a paper and get accepted, you have to pay, a few $1,000s to fly to Vancouver or Sydney or wherever, and that's not cheap. And that's something that is a problem. And I mean, there's no really easy solution other than having, like we do some of those, going to more blended modes or just visiting those locations. And then LAK is, doing and trying to do those things as well. So that's great. Like, for example, going to Australia, that's definitely, even though Australia is a highly developed country. Yeah, for most scholars in Australia, saying that you're going to travel to North America for a conference, that's a big thing. It's not, those funds don't come easy. Like, I cannot imagine, like, if you're, I don't know, in China or India or somewhere else. So that's almost impossible. And that's why it's great that, those geographical diversity has either to include some form of a virtual attendance or just going to those locations. There's no other way. I don't see a way around that. So just wanted to mention that.
I wonder, Vita, as well, because you raised some good points. Generally speaking, the assumption that we make is that a scholar from, say, a Latin American country, or perhaps from an African country or some Asian countries, they may not have access to resources for travel. And that's, I think, a very real concern. There's another concern that, as you noted, there are scholars at various stages in their career who also don't have a big pocket of for travel. And when you see what's happening, definitely in talking from the U.S. higher education lens, it's quite U.S. centric. The golden days of international conference travel are not quite as golden anymore. And I think Alyssa's point in the chat is an interesting one, which is, are we going to go back to conferences? Now, if you follow some of the U.S. conference themes, there's a growing number of venues and groups because they make a hell of a lot of money with their annual conferences that supports the entirety of their operations. They're basically saying it's only in person because they, some academic societies potentially lost a revenue source going forward and maybe even threatened the future functioning of their society. So if the question then is, ideally, there should be a commitment on behalf of SOLAR, if impact and broadening influence is a goal, to make a blended format a key outcome of any future events that they host. When we did both LAK 11 and LAK 12, we recorded and streamed the sessions online, partially for that reason, but also just to broaden participation in general. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. Would it make a difference for you career-wise, for anyone that's in the session, career-wise, if you attended a set of only virtual conferences up until you hit tenure or associate prof or full prof status? How much do you think that would make a difference in your ongoing annual reviews for impact and student recruitment?
I think it would be very hard for an ECR to develop the required networks to actually get tenure if that was the case, right? So there's a trade-off here. And online conferences are horrible. Has anyone gone to a really good hybrid conference as well? So the experience of LAK fully online, it's a great, it's probably one of the best virtual conferences that I've seen run since we've all had to go online. But it's got nothing on the actual in-person face-to-face conference. And I've also seen this year hybrid conferences emerging where people are showing up. All of the presentations are given in fully online mode because you don't want to, and so you're sitting in a room watching a screen of presentations, and that's not a conference experience either. And if that's available, the thing I'd be concerned about would be that ECRs and people who don't have a lot of money would have to do that because their institutions would go, well, there's this cheap option, we're not going to fly you over there. And so the people who actually most need to be building up networks and connections will actually be denied the opportunity to do that. So that's the one side of it. On the other hand, the people who are having children and ECRs and have to teach and stuff, right now can come to a conference that they've never been able to come to before. So I find myself very torn about this. I think, hybrid teaching is horrible. Hybrid conferences, I'm very curious to see a format work. And I challenge all of us to come up with a good one, but I haven't seen one yet. Like, it's terrible.
There's an alternative. I mean, don't do it a hybrid, but have a different opportunities as a society. Like, sure, a runoff, like George was saying, find resources, find a way to present your materials. If you're a virtual, have a LAK, normal LAK, like anybody else. But if you want to publish a paper and you really cannot come, so you might want to organize, I don't know, 2 months later, a Q&A session without, well, whatever, a week later, whatever, but there's a different option. Then if you're going to cater to both communities, definitely certain ECRs, young people with young families and others, they do have need, like there is no other way they will come. Organizing a different, but thinking about both, I think, is important. That just we have to do that. And Solar is doing a great job with
So here's
webinars, things like that. Yeah.
So here's another angle to think about. One of the benefits that works for academic conferences. Now, we know for years in the U.S. at least, groups like EDUCAUSE, I just saw OLC mentioned, non-academic conferences, but more practitioner-oriented. They host online events regularly, but generally speaking, that's not going to count. Let's say you're an early career researcher, that's not going to count toward an item on your CV that you're going to be able to say you had an impact. Should there be a way for Solar to create, if you will, short workshops that are submission-based, where people could then present, but it is a proceedings type of an impact? Like I'm sure that we're going to have to start playing with the online environment to do one critical thing, which is, well, generally on the background, provide more flexible options for individuals to share and engage with research and with others. But on the flip side, translate things like workshops or like a paper that's outside of a conference stream and still have that have an impact. Like there's no reason why a conference proceeding should be published April 30th. Why can't it be published, or an article published to an annual conference proceedings list, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, and just have a set of cycles regularly so that the same motivation for travel isn't there?
I think that some conferences are moving more towards like a multiple submission cycle per year, which is like an interesting possibility. I want to make sure Shamya gets a chance to chime in on this particular issue, especially as the earliest DCR here on the panel.
Thank you, Caitlin. Is it okay if I steer this conversation a little to a different direction? So I think I'm trying to question how we define representation. So is it diversity in the number of authors, a number of participants? The reason I ask this is because, can we count increase in representation through just increase in adoption of Western systems and methods and approaches in Global South, for instance? Or is increasing or improving representation, should it also be about increasing representation in alternative ways of thinking and doing, in for instance, helping our reviewers understand that there are alternative ways in which research is done, and how do we make sure that we do not reject papers just because it doesn't fit in the dominant way of, especially in this case, Western way of doing research. So for me, fundamentally, representation is probably increasing representation is more about bringing the voices from the periphery to the center rather than, I don't know, it's probably not a question of rather, it's rather, like strengthening representation is probably more than increasing diversity in attendance and authorship.
Yeah, excellent point. So kind of throwing it back, I guess in terms of the values we've talked about earlier about like how we're defining LAK and so forth. Do you think there's a way, like is that the first step? Is it actually thinking about how to diversify views and make sure that the value, and I think maybe Alyssa said something like this in the chat, I can't remember who it was, where it's like making the values more clear and having more input in those. Like, I mean, what do y'all think about how that would actually work in practice?
I'll make a small point, Caitlin. There's a duality between what a community is and how it becomes what it becomes, meaning, we can't really do central planning for an academic community, right? And we do through themes, and we say, hey, this is our theme this year. And so the research, they do shape it, but I mean, every year you have papers, you look at it and you're like, oh crap, I got to add something about the theme before I upload it, right? So the theme is more just a nice orienting strategy. But I think the question is like, we reflect what's in the community and what the community is asking about or thinking about. So the keynote this morning, is an example of sort of an emerging kind of a concept that isn't critically central to the LAK community to date. And but it's a reflection of a broader public conversation and a social conversation that's happening. So I'd be interested to hear from panel members on how do you navigate that role between, what we want the community to be, but what it actually becomes just by virtue of the publication patterns that the researchers produce.
So I think that there is a marked tendency for papers that fall within an identified subfields to get published more easily. So, and I noticed Simon's suggesting in here that, we could have special tracks which are promoting sort of other things that we're trying to guide. So, it would be possible to, set up special tracks around interdisciplinary or new approaches or novel method, like something that actually drives things towards areas. So I agree with you, George. We can't do central planning, but we can put drivers in that encourage behavior. So, NeurIPS and stuff are doing things like having a special particular review clause where you have to think about the ethics of your approach, right? So, and that's driving behavior of the community. So, if we were able to articulate the things that we care about and the things that we want the community to move towards, we can't plan it, but we can encourage it towards the places that we want to go.
Vita, I know you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about it's very challenging to do those things because it often when you think you're doing something very generic, like, oh, this applies, but it doesn't. So, for example, calls for every paper to have a racial diversity statement. Well, I'm an author from a country that's from 98% a single ethnicity. What should I now go overseas and recruit participants because they need to have racial diversity? Like, what I mean? Like it doesn't apply always. So I think that's very dangerous and can be a problematic if you don't do it right. Definitely some things, and we do have, we did over time, for example, focusing on double-blind review process and focusing on a meta-review process and trying to go over people's individual biases and bringing in senior members of the community. So we try to, but it's and that's also hard. Like all of those things, when you try to steer it, how much really is that for the whole community, and how much is still one person deciding whether it's a program chair. Let's say one program chair decides, oh, let's do this. Every paper from now on has to do whatever. And so, yeah, they can be dangerous things, I guess.
But it did drive it. So meta review has, I would argue, improved the process a little bit for us. So, it's very easy to think about our failures and to forget about some of the things that we've done that have worked. And, as someone who's wandered around in fields like cognitive science and information retrieval, those conferences are extremely exclusive, very nasty. Information retrieval has a really nasty story about SIG-IR with, someone like a PhD student presenting and then one of the senior figures in the field getting up halfway through the presentation and going, this is all wrong, sitting down again and leaving the PhD student to keep talking. That's never happened in LAK. LAK is a very inclusive community. The senior figures are very welcoming to people. So, it is very easy for us to think a lot about what we're doing wrong and to forget some of the things that we're doing right. So, let's not get too negative here.
I also want to comment on what Vita said and want, I really hope we as a community, as a LAK community, reflect on how we incentivize JEDI work. If we are going to if you're going to compare, say, a researcher 1 to researcher 2 with things like number of papers published or number of citations, and not just in the community, but also maybe, I don't know, for tenure review in a higher education institution or wherever, some of this work is hard and time consuming, and it'll probably lead to one paper where you could write 10 EDM papers or 10 LAK papers that's focusing on, I don't know, like it's, I don't know, I think like fundamentally we would probably have to think about what kinds of structures we could create that could, you know, make the, what's the phrase, level playing field or something, right? How do we change how we think about success in learning analytics? How we probably move past papers to impact social change. That's the theme of this year.
Yeah, great point, Shamya. So I think we have about 10 minutes left now. So I want to move to like a more general question session with the entire group here. So if anybody wants to ask questions or also make comments. I know some of the folks in the audience probably have thoughts of some of the questions that we talked about already. So feel free to unmute and ask the panelists or speak your truth. Not everybody at once, please. I'll fill the silence for a second by going, I think Kathy asked a question earlier that I thought was really interesting, which is about what types of practitioners does LAK attract, and if that's a different set of practitioners than maybe other venues might. What do you think, Roberto, since LAK is HCI?
Can you repeat the question? Where is that question?
Oh, it's pretty far up in the chat. I think she and I don't know if she's still on the call and if she wants to unmute and say the question, but I think it was about like if
I just reposted it.
Okay, perfect.
But I can read it too. I was just wondering if there's a distinction to be made about what types of practitioners are attracted to LAK, and because there was a conversation earlier about the different, the distinctions between HCI and LAK and EDM and learning at scale and all of these, and whether there are different practitioner groups that would be attracted to these, because that's one of the things that has been notable to me about the LAK community.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the practitioner track is actually something that probably we as a community should start to think about how to innovate, how to attract practitioners. This is a track that hasn't been growing as much as the research track. It's actually sometimes being reduced. So that's a good question. What types of practitioners we want to attract, and how can they be participating in our community more extensively? So one of the indicators is the papers that they submit, right? Some of these papers usually are written by us as researchers, as we have seen before as well. So yeah, finding ways to attract practitioners, I think that's a conversation. Probably is another panel that we need to have just on practitioners, right? That's very tricky.
I just want to mention that there have been actually a research. I'm going to post the title of the paper. At least this is a paper from 2014 that really did the social network analysis of learning analytics field. And I think that the big difference here is they're much more diverse. So if you think about the average LAK attendee has far more diverse set of knowledge than, let's say, in learning at scale, which would be more focused on computational techniques. If you go probably take a look at the background. What faculty do you work with? Probably in learning at scale, 90% will be people from comp sci background, working in departments for engineering, computer science, whatever. Whereas at LAK, you will see much higher diversity, let's say more people from education, sociology backgrounds, linguistics, whatever. So you're going to see, I think, the bigger diversity in learning analytics, and that's also making it also less, easy to bound, right? The edges where LAK goes is harder. Yeah. That's my comments from last year.
Okay. Well, I'll pass. So Simon's Zoom mic is blocked. So Kirsty, do you want to take his question about is it okay if a paper at LAK JLA could just as well be in Learning at Scale UDM 8iEd?
Well, I think no. Like, I mean, we were kind of talking about it earlier in the sense of, at the very least, there's a different kind of story to those different conferences. Like, so at the very least, even if you've got the same data and the same analysis, you would want to be telling the story differently, and you'd want to be using different references to what's gone on in the field, like at the very least. I do think we can more clearly articulate what's in and out, but I get a bit worried about it because to me, you know, anything could be in if you're telling the story well and you've got a compelling analysis and you're doing something interesting. So, you know, I get a bit worried about us being a bit too prescriptive about what's in and out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't want to put you on the spot, Alyssa, but I think you had some good ideas about this in the chat earlier about, you know, how to sort of set some standards, but also leaving it open. I don't know if you want to speak on that a little bit. I thought they were interesting ideas anyway.
Sure. Are you talking about some of the stuff I was mentioning around JLA, or
there's
a lot of comments in there now.
Sorry, yes, the stuff you were talking about JLA, about like how there were some attempts to do this already.
Yeah, so I'm trying not to be self-promotional, but go read the editorial we wrote in December, because we actually talked a lot about this stuff. And, you know, Simon, Javier, and myself are sort of rolling out as editors, and so we weren't going to do anything as strong as the add a required section before we leave, even though U.S. presidents seem to like to do those sort of things for the people who come after them. But we talked a lot about and thought about what makes for a JLA paper, and also how that might be different from LAK, because LAK is a conference, you submit what you have, whereas JLA, there's a lot more time. And so there's more cycles. And so, yeah, literally we have a section in the editorial that says what makes for a good JLA paper. And we talk a little bit about the differences between the fields. But I think the thing that we thought was most important was this notion about loops. And not that you're necessarily closing the loop. You might be creating an algorithm to look at something, but you have some idea that someday you're going to show it to someone who's actually in a classroom, let's say. And that means you're going to think differently about what kind of data, what kind of visualization. So the idea was to have this idea in your mind that someday we're going to show this to someone to make the learning analytics loop close. And that changes the way you collect the data. So that's kind of the closing the loop piece. We also talked a lot about cycles of improvement. It's not just build a tool and then get it out there and see what happens to be done, but how do we collect data on the tools that are used? So again, this kind of like cyclical thinking, and you might be, I don't remember the details now, you might be in any one of 6 phases of this, but the point is you're aware the other ones exist. And you could argue that some other fields maybe aren't always thinking about them. And that gets to Simon's notion about us thinking about systems. Like, I think we have a broader view, and there's some great quotes about how do you conduct work that's really maybe narrow, but keeping the broader view. It's like, how do you have it out of the corner of your eye? And then the last piece, only because you asked me to get on my soapbox, was the point of having problem-centric versus tool-centric research. So to me, there should be a clear problem, an educational problem in every, well, I would say in every JLA and every LAK paper, there should be a clear educational problem we're trying to address. And you might be trying to address it by building a better algorithm. So the narrow problem might be, how do we better optimize which algorithm works? But the point is, because once we get an algorithm that works really well, there's some larger reason, and that larger reason is talked about. And, instead of saying this is a paper about predictive modeling, this is a paper about early identification of struggling students. And this is, I think, very important because it raises these questions of, okay, well, we just said students are struggling. That implies that it's an individual student kind of issue, which isn't always the reason why you have problems going on, right? And so I feel like by defining the educational problem clearly, it forces us to ask these hard questions to make sure the really complicated data science we do is very valuable. And I've seen a lot of students who come out of a certain school of data science that will remain nameless, who are incredibly good technically and spend so much time and energy doing things that I really struggle to find the value in. And I don't think that's true of our field. This is sort of data science writ large, but I think that we want to set up systems to sort of prevent against that. And I feel clearly, obviously, quite passionately about this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. That's really helpful. Interesting. Now, and just for everybody who's not checking the chat, Simon posted the editorial, the link to it, so check that out. I think we're almost up in time, so I just want to say thank you very much to all the panelists for your great participation, opinions. I was not bored at all, which is, great for a panel. So thank you again, and thanks for attending, everybody. This was really fun.